I don't think that I would have ever gotten to this point without that. I call it a severe mercy. Illness was a severe mercy. It was a mercy because it saved me from myself, but it was the most severe way that I think I could have ever gone through it.
Hey guys. Many in this community have experienced significant trauma that preceded chronic illness. So, how did these experiences shape not only mental health and emotional health, but also physical health? Can we truly heal without addressing that part? We're going to dive deep into this fascinating topic today. Hello, everyone. I'm Raelan. On this channel, we explore the incredible resilience that we all inherently have to overcome adversity and recover from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. Today, we have Anj Granieri with us. She is a true inspiration. Anj, what she goes by, is a poet, a playwright, a musician, a speaker, and a world traveler. Despite having faced complex trauma and severe ME/CFS, she has rebuilt her life from the ground up. Now she travels the world in her beloved Airstream, sharing her story and empowering others to heal. You are absolutely going to love, I'm sure, every minute of this interview. She has so much insight and so much wisdom to share. So please join me in welcoming Anj. Anj, so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I've been excited to talk to you for a long time because you are so active in our Facebook group, and now you're one of the moderators, and you've just been such a really positive force for the thousands of people there who really need support. So, and you just have so much insight and such a great journey to share. So excited to dive into that. So why don't you start with that? Can you tell us a bit about your health journey?
Yeah. And, I also wanted to thank you, Raelan, because it was your group that I found that began really my recovery. And it was in the sea of all of these groups that I was in that were telling me that I was going to be sick for the rest of my life, that if I hadn't found your group, it might have been a different journey. So, I really feel honored to be here and get to talk to you. Yeah. So my health journey, I watched a lot of your recovery stories here on the channel, and I really would love to share a little bit more of my personal journey, because I really think that ME/CFS was actually the bridge that allowed me to live my dreams. And it seems now, looking back, as if everything that's ever happened to me was leading up to my recovery journey. So to begin, basically, I think my sensitivity is like my greatest gift. And I do think there may be like a genetic component to me being sensitive. But I also just remember growing up as a young person that it took me a while to realize that other people were not experiencing the world that I was, the way that I was. That people were not experiencing feelings as deeply as I was, that their antenna was not like as sharp as mine was. And I think that was my greatest gift, but I didn't know what to do with that gift. And I had no tools growing up like to manage that gift. And so looking back, I can see that as a result of just taking in way too much stimuli and not knowing what to do, I'm a very creative and artistic person. I started to have like a nervous system that became overstimulated really young. And looking back, that looked like my OCD that I had starting at the age of 6, where I couldn't sleep at night. And I had to go and check all the outlets and check the stove and check the iron because I was afraid that the house is going to burn down, or my fear of going over bridges. Or when I was in primary school, I was bullied mercilessly. And every day I didn't want to go to school because I had so much fear. And, by the time I was in secondary school, like in high school, I was involved with by then I had developed an eating disorder. I had a binge eating disorder. And by the time I was in high school, I fell in love with a man who was basically already, by the age of 15, he was an addict, and he had borderline personality disorder. And we dated for about 6 years. That was like my first 2 decades of life till about 20. And looking back on that, I can see that my nervous system was already priming me for the final hit of ME/CFS, because I was sick all the time. And I thought I just had like a bad immune system. I thought it was genetics, but I noticed that my peers didn't need as much sleep as I did. I noticed, and I actually, developed panic around sleep, because if I didn't get enough sleep, I felt so poor. Every picture of me from the 1980s, I have a tissue in my hand. I'm blowing my nose. I have strep throat. I had chronic migraines. I had PMS. I always seemed to be ill. And I see now that that was because my nervous system was becoming more hyperreactive and more sensitive to stimuli. And it was suppressing my immune system, causing me to be sick. But I didn't know that at the time. So that was the first 2 decades of my life. And my 20s, it just kept going. Now, this is also kind of coupled with behavioral tendencies that I picked up around driving myself and people pleasing and overperforming, which also revved up my nervous system. But in my 20s, I worked in this alternative school as a teacher for kids that couldn't be in the public school system. I was threatened with gun violence, knife violence every day. I started to develop like an eye twitch. I started to have noise sensitivity. And by the time I was 30, I got back involved with that same gentleman I'd known in high school. And it was much worse. Just there was a lot of, dark stuff, like heavy stuff, trauma. And at the end of that year, when I was 30, we broke up. And I had known since I was 18 that I wanted to live a different sort of life, that I wanted to travel, that I wanted to be nomadic, that I wanted to live a life of my passions of music and poetry. And so we split, and I bought a camper van that summer. I worked like a maniac, 3 jobs, don't know how to sit still, bought this camper van. I put out like my most recent album of original music. I flew to California. I had interviews set up with MTV. And the night before I was supposed to like launch my new life in this camper van, this love that I had relapsed, walked into traffic, and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And I gave up my dreams, flew to be by his side, and became his nurse for 5 years. And it's so funny, Raelan, like looking back at my life, because in those 5 years, I learned all about neuroscience, which ironically helped me when I got ME/CFS 6 years later. And yet it was those last 5 years that I was his full-time caregiver alone that was really what revved me up to finally get sick. So in those 5 years that I took care of him, I just kind of became this magnificent robot. Further separation of mind body, further separation of integrity with myself, further separation of choosing myself, of listening to my body, of hearing it at all. At this point, it was not whispering, it was yelling at me, but I wasn't listening. And finally, 5 years later, I separated myself from him because he went back to drugs and alcohol. And I had what the doctors call a temporary induced psychosis from depression, severe depression. And I had noise sensitivity, derealization, and light sensitivity. I had to live in a dark room for about 4 weeks, but no like fatigue, none of this. It was at that point that I decided to resurrect the dream of traveling, and I bought another camper van. And this time I was going to rebuild it and rebuild myself in the process. So I started rebuilding it, but the same mechanisms inside me that had caused these problems continued. I pushed and drove and worked like a crazy person and had poor boundaries. And within 1 year of trying to rebuild the camper, I got reactivated glandular fever. And that was what tipped me into full-blown ME/CFS. And it was that moment that began a 7-year journey in which I rebuilt this camper and rebuilt myself. And now here I am in 2024, and I am in 1 month or two about to move into this house of my dreams, fully recovered, and live my life. So I like to share the story because I believe that this dream I had since I was 18 would not have been possible if I had not gone through ME/CFS, because I would never have chose it. I would have just kept giving myself away and living out of integrity with myself. But ME/CFS, it begs us, it commands us to live in integrity with ourselves, or we can't get well. So that's the story that leads me up to the moment I got sick. The story of how I got well is something else, but that's the story of how I got ill.
I think that, thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's so great and so important to here, this is why I typically ask people to tell us what life was like before ME/CFS, because there's so many things that we see in retrospect. We're sort of potentially priming us for this, and really speaks to the transformation that we feel after it, because as unpleasant as it is a good teacher.
It's
So,
a
yeah,
good teacher.
definitely.
It's the
Yeah.
great sage. That's what I call it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I call it growth boot camp, but yours sounds much better.
That too. They could be that too. Yeah. Growth boot
Yeah.
camp.
So, what was it like when the ME/CFS started, and how did you start to figure out how to navigate through and past that?
Yeah. So I had mild ME/CFS for from 2018 to 2021, in which I did all the things that people on your recovery channel don't need to hear, but it's the same thing that everyone does. I went to the doctors. They told me nothing's wrong. They told me I'm depressed. I should exercise. I exercised. I crashed. I tried taking a million supplements. I chased down reactivated Epstein-Barr virus. I started to think I was crazy because it would come and go. And so I just ignored it basically. And from 2018 to 2021, it's funny, I couldn't stop running. Like I just kept going. Like I couldn't sit still. I just had to keep moving. So I aggressively tried to rebuild this camper, but my life was chaos. My relationships were chaos. I had wounds that hadn't been addressed. I didn't know how to say no to things I wanted to say no to, yes to things I wanted to say yes to. So in 2021, post COVID, when my life blew up and I lost my business, and I was coming out of another really tumultuous relationship where it was basically the same guy all over again, because that's what I was attracting. In 2021, after a bout of exercise where I went and exercised multiple days in a row, I crashed, as people say. I say wobble, but this one was different. I couldn't get up. Like it happened. I recovered 24 hours later, and I got up and I tried to live my life, and I went back down again. And then I tried to get up, and this time I could only do like half of what I was able to do the day before, and I crashed down again. And then I got up and it was like 20%, and I crashed down again. And in like 10 days, I went from mild to this new level of illness that I didn't know was possible. And to be honest with you, the hell that I was in, the severity of that illness. I mean, I've rarely spoken to many people sicker than I was. You meet people who have a lot of neurological issues, and you meet people who have a lot of physical issues. And I had like everything. I was completely incapacitated. And I went down to live with my parents. I was chasing down hyperbaric oxygen therapy at the time. And the trip down there made me so much worse. And I was living in their bedroom, a spare apartment. And for about 8 months, I just lived in a dark room. If my parents tried to visit me and come to the door with groceries, I'd crash 4 rooms away. If my cat walked across the bed sheets, I was in agonizing pain. I mean, I had hallucinations and POTS, and I used to get like lightning bolt sensations to my tongue, and the brain fog. I mean, but it was not a bearable level of sickness. And my parents used to think I was having seizures because I would stutter and stammer, and it was bad. Anyway, so I lived like that for about 6 months. And I would say that stage of recovery was mostly, before I found your channel, was mostly just like just despair, because I had no idea what was happening to me. And I was chasing down hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which I spent 15 grand on, because I was convinced that was the answer. And it made me better. But the problem was that it was helping all the secondary problems that come with ME/CFS. It helped my immune system, and it helped my cellular function, and it helped my brain fog because it was reducing inflammation. But then when the green light came from my body, I didn't know how to pace or what that was. So I just went back again to my energy level, and I went into the deepest crash of the whole journey, where I reached a level where I couldn't, I specifically remember trying to make my hand pick up a fork to feed myself at the table. And my mother was sitting there watching, and I started to cry because I couldn't make my hand move. Like it was paralyzed. I couldn't make it pick up the fork. And only people like you and the others watching this can know that terror when your brain is not computing with your arm. So those first 6 months was like that. But then I began with my brain fog to listen to any information from anyone that got well, which I only found because of your channel. I started to see people recovering. And then my recovery came down to what I call the 4 pillars. And I have a coaching program that I created that I wish existed when I was sick like this, because I believe through my recovery that recovery comes down to 4 pillars. And I hear people talking about the different pillars and all these recovery stories. And many of them talk about how this one pillar is the way to get well. But in my experience, it was never one thing. It was like 4 things that I had to come at different times in recovery, circle back to it again, build on it. So those 4 pillars are what we call brain retraining, or like, nervous system work, whether that's top-down processing or up or bottom-up processing, and understanding what was happening to me. So I learned a lot about, maybe you've heard of limbic kindling. I stumbled upon limbic kindling, and that blew my mind. And it made so much sense in my life. And for those of you who don't know what limbic kindling is, you should totally check it out. But it blew my mind, and it made so much sense. So once I understood what was going on, then I understood why I needed to do brain retraining. But interestingly, brain retraining didn't really work that well for me in the beginning. I had to circle back around. I was too revved up. I couldn't stop my thoughts. I couldn't see them. They were like a freight train flying by 7 million miles an hour. How could I stop what I couldn't see? So what I did was I started to meditate, because I recognized that I couldn't brain retrain because I couldn't stop. My thoughts were too fast. So I started to meditate, mindfulness meditation, which focuses on slowing your mind down by focusing on your breath, sensations, and sound. And that was the foundation. That was what got me started. That was all I could do in the beginning alongside laying in bed. So that was the first pillar. Yeah.
Before we move on, you mentioned brain training, top-down processing or bottom-up processing. Can you explain what that is, or what you mean by that?
Yeah. So by top-down processing, what I mean is like where you work with your thoughts in order to change the physical reality of of your body. So like if you tell yourself a different story, if you practice like the stop technique, or you don't allow yourself to perseverate on ME/CFS or on symptoms, then you can create biochemical changes that will move downwards onto the body as the result of the thoughts themselves quieting the limbic system of our brain. So that's what most people are talking about when they're talking about brain retraining. And the reason why I get so frustrated when I talk to people who maybe I'm going to coach or they're going to take my program, and they say brain retrain doesn't work for me, is because I'll say to them, maybe you're not ready for brain retraining. Like I had to do bottom up processing first, which is like somatics. That's where you work on how you feel in the body. You work with the body, creating safety in the body using somatic tools. And that sends biochemical changes up to the brain. So to quiet the brain. So you can go at it from 2 ways. And I had to do bottom up first. Towards the end of my recovery, I discovered Dan Newfer, who I know I know you know him very well, and ANS Rewire. Towards like the last 20% of my recovery, I found his program, and that's when I did top down. I hadn't done really any top down processing except meditation, which was like the foundation of my whole process, and that is a form of brain retraining. But I didn't do it in the traditional way that I see in so many programs, where I was working with my thoughts and I didn't know what any of that was. And I couldn't work with thoughts because I couldn't even grab them or see them. I was so manic, so unbelievably out of my body and stressed and so hyperreactive to the slightest sound, the slightest smell, the slightest noise or light that like it was impossible. So meditation was the way that I started with like bottom up. I guess that actually meditation is is both, honestly, because if you practice mindfulness meditation, you are focusing on sensations in the body. And so that is kind of somatics, but you're also quieting the thoughts, and that's brain retraining. So I guess it's both of
Before we move
recovery.
on, I have one more question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've come to learn if I have the question, people watching probably do as well. You mentioned limbic
Yeah.
and kindling. I don't know what
Yeah.
that is. I'm very intrigued. Can you briefly
Yeah.
explain what that is?
Yeah. So it's called limbic kindling. It's actually
Kindling, right.
it's yeah, that's okay. Yeah, limbic kindling. So, and I talk a lot about this also in my program because, like I said, for me it was like, but okay. So basically, the concept is, and it goes back to these two doctors, Goddard, and I forget who the other one is, but Gupta, even his whole program was based on these two other doctors. He's the one that Gupta himself was the one that actually coined, I believe, the term limbic kindling going into early 2000s. But it's basically the concept that if you have, if your brain is exposed to a stressor, and if it is constantly having the HPA axis, which is what turns on when we get stressed, if that is being chronically activated all the time, what they've done studies that have shown that what happens in the brain is the brain becomes, there's actual little like phalange, like little hairs that are in our nervous system that actually grow and become like more sensitive to stress. But the long and short of the idea behind limbic kindling is that when the HPA axis is chronically activated, we become hypersensitized. Your stress response itself becomes hypersensitized. And as a result, it takes less exposure to stress to activate the HPA axis. So if you think about this in the context of ME/CFS, think about when you were very, very mild and how you had just like a few triggers. And as you crash and crash and crash, what happens is in those crashes, the hyperreactivity of the brain is actually, it's like pouring gas on a fire, like kindling of a fireplace. Like the kindling creates an inferno, the kindling being the crash, because we send messages of danger and sadness and sorrow and all of the terror back to the brain. And that in that state creates more arousability. So when you come out of the crash, now your brain is actually like, imagine it just like more reactive. And now it takes less like exposure to stress to cause it to respond. And you can see in people with ME/CFS that that's how you can get worse and worse and worse. And that's actually also how you can get better and better and better, because we can retrain the stress response. But limbic kindling explains why the stress response keeps getting more triggered, like by less. Like if you have a trigger to perfume, you might begin with just like a small triggered perfume. Towards the end of the illness, in the worst case, if you think about perfume, you get a crash. So your sensitivity to that trigger gets worse and worse because the through limbic kindling, your brain becomes more aroused and more hyper reactive and more sensitive to stress. And it also has to do with the fact that limbic kindling is the cause of stress and can be caused by stress because of the bidirectional relationship between mind and body. So it can cause stress and it can be caused by stress. So that's a little bit of an introduction to it, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, I think we're ready for pillar 2.
Yeah, right. So pillar 2 is the concept of what I call the expansion contraction cycle. And this is how you did it without the fancy title. Everyone who's recovered has done it. It's when you are stuck in this level of activity, which we call our baseline, and you start to try to go outside that baseline and you have symptoms. So you try to expand beyond the baseline, you have symptoms. So what I learned how to do was how to expand. Well, first what I had to do was learn where my baseline was, which I call the soft fence, which means like it's a soft parameter, like perimeter around what you're capable of doing, but it's not a steel fence, so you can move through it, but it is there representative of how resilient your nervous system is and where your body is as a result. So it's the ability to move through the soft fence, and then you have symptoms and you contract back down and you work with those symptoms. And then based on how strong they were, how intense they were, and how long they lasted, you go for it again and you alter your approach based on that. So what I found is people will come to me and I'll coach them, and they'll be brain retraining and they've got it. Like they've got it. They've been doing it for months. They can't get better because you can brain retrain all day long. But if you then go out and try to run, or you go out and you walk too far, you're gonna crash down because the anaerobic system in the body is broken. It's not working correctly. So if you cross into an anaerobic threshold and you keep walking, no matter how much your brain retraining, you're gonna crash. So you have to combine the brain retraining. You have to practice the brain retraining or the bottom up processing of somatics so that the green light goes on. But if you don't know where the limit is and how to press up against it gently, the brain retraining, in my experience, it could not recover me, especially as severe as I was. So this is the crucial piece, is pillar number 2. And some people need that pillar in order to recover because they've already got the brain retraining piece. Or they know how to pace really well, but they don't know how to practice the nervous system piece. And then the third pillar is what I call supporting the body, which is what most people have been doing for years. That's like the supplements and LDN and dealing with the MHFTR gene mutation and mold and heavy metals and basically reducing your allostatic load. So taking the burden off the immune system if there's anything that is hindering it or holding it down, because it's not just the nervous system, but the body. Because you have to remember there's like 5 different systems that are responsible for homeostasis, but you can't very easily create a homeostasis reset if you are suppressed by some kind of multiple viruses and mold and all these things. Although I do feel like that piece most people have got, but some people don't, so there was that pillar.
And I like that you explained it as just one pillar, because I think a lot of us, at least this was the case for me, I just lived in that pillar. I thought that was the only answer.
Yeah, $15,000 on HBOT. That was my pillar. Yeah. But it is an important pillar because if you change how you eat, and there were some key supplements that I took that did move the needle. But I think of them as, I call them like the stirrups on the recovery horse. So if I use them to pull me up onto the horse, and then the horse is my lifestyle, and then it works. But if I leaned on them as the solution, then I don't think I would have gotten well, because then it's like, then you're in like, I want a cure mindset instead of like a healing mindset. And I'd still be on all of those things, LDN and all that stuff I took. So that's the third one.
I'm very curious.
You don't know what it is.
The edge of my seat. The first story has been amazing. I feel like you've already covered it all. This is absolutely brilliant. I'm loving every word that you're saying. But yes, okay, I feel like we need a drum roll. Okay, 4th pillar.
I'm the musician, so no. Okay, I actually think the 4th pillar is the one that I've also seen people get tripped up and they're not recovered because they're missing the 4th pillar. And it's what got me from 80 to 100%. And that's what I call personal transformation or rediscovering your wholeness. And this is like when you have addressed like all the triggers and your body's coming back and you're getting the green light and you're reintegrating back into life. The trouble is, now maybe it's not for everybody, but I see it with a lot of people, and it was very true for me. The problem is that if you don't deal with the things that, if I didn't deal with the things that had me live such a crazy life, I would just go get sick again. Like I would be sick again. So when I got to 80%, and that was around when I discovered brain retraining. And at that point, I was meditating 2 hours a day, not like yoga nidra and guided relaxation, but like an hour of sitting, unguided mindfulness meditation in the morning, an hour at night. And there were huge changes happening in my body as a result of that. But at that point, that's when I did trauma work, worked with my attachment style, learned how to do boundaries, learned who I actually was. And that was the scariest part of recovery, scarier than being in a bed alone for 8 months and having like an ego death where I was completely alone. And that was terrifying. But what was more terrifying was the last 20% realizing that I wasn't the person I thought I had lost, that wasn't even me. It was just some collage of maladaptive behavior traits I'd picked up along the way to survive. And as they all got stripped away by ME/CFS, and I was left just naked, like, who am I? Then I started to do all this work, and it was so freeing. I felt like for the first time at 38 years old, I was actually meeting myself, and I had lived my life so other focused. I had this amazing interpersonal emotional intelligence. Like if I walked in a room and someone was sad, I would feel it and I would know it immediately. And they'd see me, I'd see them, like magnet. But I had no intrapersonal emotional intelligence, which means intrapersonal. I had no idea what I was feeling ever. I was completely disconnected from myself. So that last 20% was actually getting to know myself. And that's the percent I'm still in. That's the part that I think will go on for a very long time, which is why I still say I'm in recovery, because I see those triggers still coming up. And every time they come up, I think, oh, there's ME/CFS again. And I don't mean symptoms. I mean, when those triggers come up, I think about how I got sick in the first place. And I go, what triggers are pointing me to where I am still not free? Where am I still not free? And when the trigger comes, I'm like, I know that I have to deal with that trigger, because if I don't, I won't be free. And there's a chance I might get sick again. So, and this is another thing that I feel like is different in my story than I see in a lot of people's stories. I think recovery is for life. I think that it's very much for me like being an alcoholic. Like, hi, my name's Anj. I'm in recovery from ME/CFS, because I see the illness as a result of a life that was lived out of integrity with myself. And so every day, much like an alcoholic, I have to live in integrity with myself, with my body, with what it wants. And if I don't, then I have no trouble believing it would start sending me messages again. They'd probably be little whispers at first. And if I ignored them, maybe then they would get a little louder. But that doesn't, to me, mean that I'm like in remission. I believe I'm recovered. So those are the 4 pillars. And I always meet people who are doing something so right. And they're so frustrated. And they're like, I'm never going to get better. And I'm like, no, we just need to focus on another pillar. In my case, that was the journey. And I think that if people could understand that there isn't this one way, I get sad when there's people who they practice brain retraining programs and they come to me and they say, well, my coach said to me that I'm not responding to symptoms well, and that's why I'm not getting better. And they're crushed with grief and guilt. And like, that's not true. I'll just say to them, maybe we're just on the wrong pillar right now. We'll circle back to brain retraining. Maybe we need to focus on something else. And it makes me feel so good because it worked for me and it's working for others, for people who feel left behind, for people who feel like, these programs that are trying to tell them that this is the way, the only way, that they're realizing that it's a much more multifaceted thing. There's more to it than just, visualizations and, positivity and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work exactly the same way for another person. So there are the 4 pillars. That's what I based my whole program on, basically, is the 4 pillars. And we go into all of them over 8 weeks. So yeah, that's how I got well.
Explain that so well. I just think this encompasses recovery so succinctly. This is really well put. I love bucketing into these pillars. I think that's such a great way to think about it. I imagine for different people, some pillars need more emphasis than others, and that's going to vary from person to person, which is why we see so much variety in recovery stories and how that
yes
isn't a one size fits all. And it really validates for all the people that have like, I've been doing these things, all of this stuff so right, and it worked for someone else. But maybe that's not the pillar that needs the most focus for me. So they're all important. But yeah, very well.
Or maybe the other thing is that, like, I always say, if you're working on something, like you're meditating and you're like, the needle isn't moving, like I'm not getting better. And then you abandon meditation and now you try pacing. And I'll be like, no, you can't do that. I always say you have to build the recovery house, habit upon habit upon habit, until you literally shift enough momentum to shift the body back into homeostasis. So even if you feel like it's not working, you have to keep the habits. Like, even if you don't feel like you see results, you have to build them on top of each other. So that can also be sometimes why I think people don't get well, is they quit something too soon, when really they should build something on top of it instead of letting it go. Because that might be what moves the needle, is that you need to build on top of it. And that's overwhelming for people because there's so many things that we can do to get well, which is why in my program, we focus on one habit at a time. So it's one thing at a time until we build the whole recovery house. And it might take a while, but at least each of these habits are becoming second nature and it's not so overwhelming. So that's how I did it. And that's how I try to teach others to do it. And I was so sick. I can relate to every single person in my program because I was completely incapacitated. So I feel like it's possible. It's very possible, I get excited about it.
It is exciting. It's so exciting. We used to have such a horrible, pessimistic view of these conditions. And now, I hope we're finally changing that perception. I know there's still way too many people out in the world that become unwell, and that this is the message their doctor gives them, is a learn to live with it sort of thing. No one gets better. But with the beauty of the internet, most of us go out and Google our symptoms, for better or for worse. In this case, I think for the better, because as long as you're putting the word recovery at the end of your search, you're going to find a lot of
You're going to find it, especially your channel. Yeah. And I mean, now I'm living, 5 months I've been living as a digital nomad. I lived in Singapore. I lived in Thailand. I'm going to Vietnam in 3 days. I lived in Malaysia. I'm going to go back in the US and travel around in this camper. I have invitations to speak at conferences. I'm writing a book. Like, the irony of the whole thing, Raelan, is that, like, I don't think that I would have ever gotten to this point without that. I call it a severe mercy. The illness was a severe mercy. It was a mercy because it saved me from myself, but it was the most severe way that I think I could have ever gone through it. But now I choose myself. I'm in integrity with myself, which means I will choose to stay in relationship with myself, even if it means losing connection to another. I never lived that way. And that's so dysregulating and traumatic, because then when people leave you, they take you with them and you're left with nothing. But if you hold on to yourself, if you stay in connection with yourself and they can leave and you're okay. That took me 3.5 decades to find. And now there's peace. And now I get to live my dreams. So thank you, ME/CFS. You brutal, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I say it all the time. Those 10 years I had with it were mostly horrible. There wasn't one easy day. But I wouldn't take it back. If I had a magic wand, I could not. I can kind of picture where I'd be right now if I hadn't. And it's not a good place. It's completely transformed who I am. And
your life.
Everything. And just like you, before that, I don't think I had a moment of introspection. I just went through life being as busy as possible, not even realize that I was just chronically stressed, severe anxiety, just
so high.
Really bad place, really low self-esteem, just really critical on myself all the time, never feeling like I was ever quite good enough, no matter how hard I tried. And I tried so hard, and just it's not a way to live your life. And just so much of my value came from like people pleasing and what did everybody else think of me, and it just a mess. So, and I think I wouldn't want to relive those 10 years again, but I imagine, like you, I don't fear that I'll have to. And I think remission, or sorry, not remission, you say recovery is a good word. I think, remission can work also, but our definition of fully recovered is changing because we're understanding that this is our body working in a natural and normal way in response to this high stress life, high stress environment, trauma that we're carrying around. So we never want it to stop doing that. Like, we always want some warning signals, but now we have the tools and the understanding that we're not going to get stuck there for a decade again. So when these little, things pop up, you're like, okay, I hear you. All right.
Yeah, I think it's just I think for me it's just, when I say it's for life, what I mean is that, like, if I stop using my tools to
Yeah.
continue to regulate a nervous system that was revved up for decades, and don't use them when I engage high levels of stress, because I'm out there living like a big life, and there's stress. Like, I've been traveling for 4.5 months, different beds and different languages, and there's been so much stress. If I don't use my tools,
Yeah.
then, like, I can't, like, my body has all these patterns that go back decades. So I have to keep reinforcing the new tools so it doesn't go back to those patterns. That's what recovery means to me. And that's why I don't use the word remission, because
Yeah.
it makes it sound like I have a disease that, like, could come back at any time. And I don't think of it that way at all.
Yeah.
So
And that's an important point too, because I used to get, and a lot of people write to me saying the same, really worried about stress, because life's going to get stressful and we're built to handle stress. We're very resilient if you have those tools. So it's okay.
yeah,
Life isn't just going to be this rosy, happy
no,
ever after. And I used to think of the things I did to get well as things that were going to stop once I was well, but not a single one of them has. And that's a good thing. You come out with this toolkit to really help you
yeah,
slip. And sometimes you're going to forget to use your tools, but then you pick yourself back up. You don't get stuck there. And it's just a really empowering thing, I think, to feel and know how much control you have over your health, over your mental health, your physical health. Because prior to getting any CFS, I thought all of these things just struck at random. And of course, genetics and different things play a role. But our
yeah.
understanding now is that our thoughts, our lifestyle has a much more significant impact than our genetics do. So it's just really nice to know that, yeah, I'm not just a sitting duck waiting for something to strike me down out of nowhere, and then I have nothing that I can do.
No, and I always tell people, and if you're watching this, I'll just tell you as well, that it feels like life is passing you by when you have ME/CFS. Like, everyone is moving forward, everyone is doing all these things, and you're doing nothing. But the work you do when you are recovering from this illness, it's like you're at the gas station filling up your tank. You're not standing still, like, you are readying yourself. And then when the gates open and you're back in the game, you fly ahead of everyone because you've done work
Yeah.
that nobody does.
Yeah.
Like, they may be moving now, but the work inside, like, you're moving internally, they're moving externally. And then when you can move internally and externally, you fly right past, like, right past, because you've got all these tools they don't have. Nobody knows how to manage stress. Nobody knows themselves intimately like that, or knows how to listen to their body, or, like, understands their attachment style, or, like, I mean, you're just going to soar. I see it over and over and over again. So I hope it gives you some hope, because
Yeah.
you're not standing still.
That is really important. And I don't know if you find the same, but I find it really challenging when people ask me about my health journey and how I recovered. It's a tough thing to summarize for someone who hasn't been through it, because I'm like, how many hours do you have? Because there isn't a 3 sentence answer I can give you. Well, it was this supplement, and then I had to take out legumes, and, like,
No.
it's so much bigger than that. And I used to explain it, well, I still do, but when I got sick, when I got any CFS, I say it felt like I'd been kidnapped from my life. It felt like I'd been
Yeah.
kidnapped from the planet. And I'd say it's like a bad thing. And it really felt traumatic and horrifying. But really, I sort of was kidnapped from my life in a rescue type of way. Like,
Yes. Oh God, it's so true. It's so true. It is. That's why I always say ME/CFS is the greatest I love you from your body, because, and it might not ring true for everyone, but for me, it did. It's like, I couldn't say no, I couldn't stop. And the body, like Gabor Mate says, the body said no. The body stopped. Like, it was like, okay, like, it just rescued me from the madness. I couldn't stop, this insanity of my life. And it rescued me from that in a, like I said, really brutal, really difficult way. But you're so right, Raelan. I resonate with that so much.
so if people want to learn more about you, what do you have? You clearly have a ton of support for people. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how they can learn more?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is just anjgranieri.com, and my Instagram, which is Anj Granieri. I have a program that's called the Edison Effect. And I just changed the way that it's formatted. So you can take it as a self-study program. You can take it because I wanted there to be different price points because I know very well that it's very hard for people to financially afford programs. So I have it offered as a self-study program. I have it as what's called study and support, where you work with me and others through 8 weeks of video coaching and the program itself. And then I have a lifetime access version where you go through that cohort and then you can access alumni calls for as long as the program exists, anytime you need them, and access to the program for as long as it exists. And I created that program, like I've explained to Raelan, based on those 4 pillars. And so you can, wherever it is you are in recovery, in my feeling, you can plug the holes. You might go through the whole thing and it could be the week on how to restore sleep that moves you forward. Or it could be that you thought you were pacing, but you were really just pacing to cope and you need to understand how to pace to recover, and that moves you forward. It could be the somatics and mapping your autonomic nervous system, polyvagal theory. It could be the rediscovering your wholeness and personal transformation. But I really feel that it's the program I wish had existed when I got well. It's the program I created for myself to get well. So if you're struggling at all, with the concept of just a brain retraining program or just a pacing program or just functional medicine or, just working with somatics and visualizations and like trauma, and you want something more comprehensive, my program might be right for you. And it's very important that it resonates with you. If I don't resonate with you or what I'm saying doesn't resonate, then I'm not the right person. But you're welcome to go to my website. You can learn more. You can also do a free discovery call with me. And if I'm not the right person, I'll be happy to talk about other programs with you and point you in the right direction, because the most important thing is that you get well and that all your beautiful gifts and talents are sent back out into the world.
And I couldn't possibly love this or you more. Thank you so much for this. Of course, we'll link all of this in the video description so people at least take a look. She's got really great stuff to offer. And I know it's a lot to take in, so I summarize this also in my weekly newsletters. So if you're like, wow, that was a lot of information and you're not already on my mailing list, we'll have this for you in bullet form, the key takeaways and all the links that you need to connect with Anj. So thank you so much, Anj. Oh my goodness, every word today was gold. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And I forgot to say that if you go to my website, I have a freebie, like a free video that you can access when you go there. So that's there too when you sign up for my newsletter, just so that you know. Okay.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to your thoughts and your comments. You guys also share such brilliant, insightful stuff. So please keep it coming. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And I hope to see you in this